Bienvenidos to the Paseo podcast. I am your host, Joshua Smyser-DeLeon, and today we are talking to Melissa Cristina Márquez. She is a Puerto Rican marine biologist, science communicator, and author. She's been featured in places like National Geographic, Discovery Channel, GQ, Forbes, and Good Morning America. And of course, of all the places in the world to be right now, not only is she in Australia, but she's joining us on the show today. So, Melissa, we appreciate you making the time. Welcome to the Paseo podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Joshua. It is un placer.
Igualmente. Why did you decide to become a marine biologist? Specifically, what attracted you to studying sharks?
Yeah, so, I was born in Puerto Rico. And so my first memories are of me on the beach. And my dad likes to joke that the only thing that would shut baby Melissa up at 3 o'clock in the morning was The Little Mermaid. So it seems like I had the ocean in my blood from a very young age. And yeah, my first memories are of me being out on the beaches of Puerto Rico, the same beaches as well. And I got to see them over time, how they changed. And to me, it was always fascinating seeing how they changed above the ocean, like waves, but also below, and seeing all the different animals. And so that for me kind of really solidified my love for the ocean and wanting to learn a little bit more about it. But it wasn't until I moved from Puerto Rico to Mexico and then Mexico to the United States that I really fell in love with sharks, just because when we moved, it was during the summertime. And during the summertime, usually the Discovery Channel has a program that's called Shark Week. Mm-hmm. And so during Shark Week, it's a whole entire week dedicated to shark programming. And I turned it on by happenstance. Got to see a great white shark kind of flying out of the water off of South Africa. And since then, I've been hooked.
Dang. What part of, I mean, I'll be honest, you're going to hate me, but I'm terrified of fish. I kid you not. I like the idea of fish, but if I'm in the same water as them, I've been in El Yunque in the water, and all of a sudden I'll see a big fish, and they're not even you've seen way bigger fish than this. Is a little tiny thing, but to me it's huge. I'm I gotta get out of here. I just can't do it, and I don't know why. I think I haven't been exposed to the right experience yet.
You know what? Actually, quite a lot of people are afraid of fish and of other different marine animals. But it makes sense. That's not really our natural environment if you think about it. I mean, look at our hands and our feet. These are meant to be on land, and so it's such a completely different environment that almost having that loss of control, because even the best swimmer on our planet is nothing compared to just regular fish, not talented whatsoever compared to some fish that are out there. Yeah. And so I think it is quite unnerving to immerse yourself almost in a different planet, even though we share the same exact planet with this ecosystem.
Yeah, and I really liked a TEDx talk you gave, and you were talking about how sharks are portrayed in the media and how the things around us can really shape how we look at other animals. I have some questions for you, Melissa, that it's you're going to teach me a bunch about sharks.
Well, let's go.
I have so many questions. But before we get to that, I did want to ask you, in your experiences as a Latina in STEM, and shout out to you. You had mentioned you're working on your PhD right now. So that's just amazing. Major props. What would you say are some of the biggest obstacles preventing more Latinas from entering into the STEM field?
That's a really good question. And it's a multi-pronged and complex problem that doesn't really have an easy solution. I think some of the obstacles that I've seen, at least, is definitely lack of proper educational opportunities for the Latinx communities. So a lot of times you go to schools where it's predominantly Latinx community there, and you don't have teachers who can properly teach you science and mathematics and English and writing and coding. So that already puts you at a disadvantage. Then you've got a lack of adequate parent involvement, and that's often due to them working long hours. Sometimes there's language barriers. Sometimes they have insufficient formal schooling, so they don't really know how to help you. There's cultural attitudes as well involved. And then, of course, there's the absence of role models for Latinx students. And while a lot of people may not think that representation of seeing yourself kind of do something is important, it actually is very, very important. And for a lot of people, myself included, it can be quite demoralizing when you look at something, say like a lineup of scientists, and you can't see somebody that you relate to or someone who looks like you. You almost feel as if that industry just isn't welcoming to you and who you stand for.
And as you were entering into your field, when you said, like, it's kind of tough to look around you, not see other people that look like you. Were you lucky enough to have someone that looked like you in your field already? Just in terms of, like, from a mentorship perspective, or were all of your mentors or people you had to learn from just white men?
Yeah, pretty much. There were two females that I really looked up to, which is Sylvia Earle and Eugenie Clark. But both of them aren't Latina. And, both glass shattering people in their own regards, just the amount of work that Sylvia Earle still does today and that Eugenie Clark did before she passed away not too long ago. And so it was great having at least two female role models, but you didn't really get to see them. And kind of how you said, with how sharks are portrayed in the media, how shark scientists are portrayed is usually that it is an older white male. And so growing up, even though I wanted to be a shark scientist, I was like, oh, I don't know if this is something I can get into because there's no females, let alone any Latinas. And, thankfully, there are now a lot of groups that allow you to converse with not just people from the Latinx community, but also other communities as well, such as Black and Marine Science, Latino Outdoors, minorities in shark sciences. All of those are kind of specifically geared towards the minorities in marine sciences or in the wildlife sphere. So you can kind of have that sense of community and you're not as alone. But that wasn't around when I was growing up. And so it was quite isolating and a bit demoralizing at times.
What were you telling yourself to kind of get you through that time those times when you were feeling demoralized? Like, did you ever reconsider, like, did I make the right decision? And how'd you kind of push through that?
Yeah, it is one of those things where I'm still technically early in my career, having working still for my PhD. And so it still sometimes does feel a bit demoralizing in that academia, that culture is just so different from the culture that I grew up with, which as a Latina, it's all about your comunidad, about your just that community that you have, essentially. La comunidad, that is the big one. You always look out for one another. You're always there with welcoming arms, that sort of thing. Academia is the complete opposite of it. There's a lot of competition. It almost is like the complete opposite of my values and of my morals. And so it can be quite demoralizing at times, even today. But it's one of those things where A, I'm stubborn. And so if I say I want to be something, I'm gonna do it. But B, it's also, I think, my passion and my love for it trump more of the bad stuff, essentially. And so I'm like, I'm really passionate about this. I love what I do. That to me makes it all worth it.
When I was looking at your website, I saw, you have bylines in Forbes and GQ and or you were featured in Forbes, GQ, National Geographic, Good Morning America, like all these really cool outlets. Can you share a little bit about what, saying yes to those opportunities and working hard to get those opportunities has meant for you from a visibility standpoint?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I take a really great responsibility knowing I'm in that position to be a role model that I once wish I had. Again, kind of how we said, when many people think representation doesn't matter, it's just so important to show people from all backgrounds, really, that they can exist in every industry. And since I've been on those kind of big name platforms, I've had so many Hispanic families come up to me and say things like, my daughter never thought she could do this, but after seeing you, she wants to be a shark scientist, she wants to be a marine biologist, and different variations of those kind of stories that just, to me, reaffirm why I do what I do, which is advocating for more diversity and inclusion in science. So I think that's probably one of the biggest impacts that I've had. and that I've been able to have. And I hope that I'll continue to make much more of an impact, because I really think, especially with me now having this platform, it allows me to pass on the proverbial microphone to people from other ethnicities and other backgrounds and give them their chance to shine. And I really do believe we need to hear stories from every culture and every ethnicity, hear about their successes, their failures, and above all, we need to hear that going into their kind of dream career is possible and it's worthwhile. Because I think, again, that lack of representation is really putting off some people from being in not just the marine sciences, but in the sciences in general, because they can't see themselves there. And why would you want to go somewhere where it doesn't seem like you're welcome?
Yeah. No, you're totally right. And I have to say, like, if a kid, going back to something you said earlier, if a kid came up to me and said, it's because of, because my kids, or because I see you, I want to be in your profession, my like heart would melt. That would be like spinach to Popeye. You know what I mean? Like, talk about an amazing motivator to keep doing what you're doing.
That's it.
Right?
Just one of those messages, it just makes it worth it. It's like I've had an impact on one person. You just don't know what kind of ripples you're creating. And so every now and then, kind of just getting those messages, it's nice to know that those ripples are out there. And I don't know what's going to happen from it, but it makes me happy knowing that at least I've changed the mind of someone.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, and I do love the mindset of, if you kick a door open, you're not closing it behind you. You're leaving it open for the next person to come through. And in fact, you're extending your hand backwards, to bring them along with you. You had written a piece in Forbes. It was about a research that sought to answer a question of how abundant sharks were in the Caribbean coral reefs before, us humans came along. Can you give us like a high level view of why that research was so significant? Because it was a great article.
Thank you. Yeah. So it's probably one of the more fascinating pieces that I've written this last little bit. And I think it's mostly because there's this saying that goes, you need to know your past in order to prevent those past mistakes, repeating them in the future, essentially. And I think it's a really excellent approach when discussing our planet. And the fact that ecologist Erin Dillon, who's from UC Santa Barbara, they essentially reconstructed historical shark communities to figure out how reef-associated shark communities have changed since humans began taking over this coastal area is fascinating. One thing that she said that really stuck out to me is having a tool or another tool, because what she did was kind of groundbreaking. So having this tool at our disposal to understand the status of shark populations and evaluate this kind of local management goals is really promising, because being able to figure out, all right, this is how it used to be, this is how it is now, what has changed, or what possible factors could have gone into this decline or this uptick per se, but for the sharks, it was a decline. I think it's really, really good. And it's just another kind of tool to have at our arsenal to learn our impact on our planet and what we can do to minimize that impact.
Can you share anything on, what the shark population looked like in the Caribbean? I'm thinking like specifically around Puerto Rico. I know the study was more focused closer to Panama City, I think, or if I'm remembering correctly. But I mean, is there anything in your mind palace about like the shark populations around Puerto Rico, just kind of sticking into that Caribbean part of the world?
Yeah. So twofold kind of question. First, about like the specific kind of study here. So for that specific study with the data, it showed that there was the biggest decline in shark abundance seemed to have occurred in like the latter half of the 20th century. So that's like within the last 100 years.
Jeez.
And that actually coincides with the advent of a targeted shark fishery in Panama. So it just shows that even though prehistorical reefs seem to have like a very similar structure or environmental conditions as today, these declines probably weren't just due to direct impact to the animals, such as overfishing and bycatch, but it was also habitat destruction and dwindling price. So it's a whole entire kind of puzzle piece. It's not just one piece here, one piece there. It's multiple pieces that are causing this decline. Now, for what shark populations look like today around Puerto Rico, unfortunately and a bit strangely, shark research there is very limited. So
Wow.
little is known about the many different species that inhabit Puerto Rican waters, what their distribution is. There's been previous molecular studies that have kind of revealed there's at least 21 different species of sharks around Puerto Rico that inhabit all sorts of different habitats. So shallow water, coastal, deep water habitats. To me, it's kind of mind boggling that Puerto Rico has stayed under the radar of the shark world for so long. But for anyone who's interested in learning a bit more about Puerto Rican sharks and what's kind of going on there, I think you should definitely follow Puerto Rico's first shark research and conservation program, which is Conservación Conciencia. And that's what they are on social media, basically. So they're hoping to add to our knowledge and understanding of these apex predators to best protect, manage, and conserve these species. They're doing some pretty awesome work right now. Their Facebook, I love following it because every couple of days you see something cool going on about sharks or what they've seen or what they're doing. So yeah, definitely if you're interested in learning kind of at the beginning of shark research for Puerto Rico, definitely give them a follow. It's just fascinating stuff.
Why do you think Puerto Rico has been so under the radar in the shark world? I mean, any reasons you think? I mean, is it like the U.S. not offering enough grant funding for research? I mean, is there a lack of desire to explore that part of the world? What would you say, in your opinion? What would you
Yeah.
think some of those reasons are?
To be honest, I think the founder of Conservación Conciencia said it best, and where a lot of people, funding wise, think that because Puerto Rico is technically a part of the United States, that we get funding from the United States for that kind of research, but we don't. So there is that kind of like lack of communication there. I know that they are working on a few different grant projects to get some more money to do more research. And I myself am very interested in doing some research there too. So I'm hoping to work with them in the near future regarding some stuff going on there. But yeah, I think it's just people push to the side brown people. That's how it is. And,
Yeah.
Puerto Rico is just so different from the rest of the United States that the United States is kind of like, no, we're not going to give you money for any of that kind of stuff, and sort of forgets about our little Caribbean nation there. But, that's why communities and programs like Conservación Conciencia are so important, because they take matters into their own hands. And then that's research that's being done by locals for locals. So then the community of Puerto Rico gets to know what's in their own backyard, how they're impacting it, how to better coexist with those predators, et cetera, et cetera.
So I didn't know that, Melissa, that that Puerto Rico doesn't really get funding from the U.S. for that scientific research, and just what a missed opportunity. I mean, the ecological wonders that exist on La Isla are, I mean, breathtaking. I mean, we have like one of the few bioluminescent bays in the world, and we have unique species of birds that live near the Yunque. I definitely would love
Puerto
to
Rican
learn.
Trench.
Exactly. It's like, oh my gosh. I mean, it's like, I don't know, mind boggling to think that there's not proper funding. So hopefully that changes, but definitely I'll check out this group. Thanks for putting it on our radar. We'll throw that in the show notes too. So let's stick in the Forbes territory, because you wrote another article for Forbes that I really liked. And you were talking about the extinction of sharks. And I know it was weird that I just laughed before jumping into that topic. So not connected. Sorry.
It's a nervous laugh.
It's a nervous laugh because it frankly was quite terrifying, because the study that was published in Current Biology showed that 1/3 of the world's sharks were threatened with extinction, and that's also, I should say, it was like sharks, I think stingrays, and I think another species. But anyway,
chimeras.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's chondrichthyans, which is the whole group, collectively what they're called. And the chondrichthyans are the sharks, the rays, the skates, and the chimeras, all of those animals right there in that group.
What makes them, did you say chondrichthyans?
Yeah, chondrichthyans.
What makes them chondrichthyans?
So all of them together are chondrichthyans. The sharks, the rays, and the skates are technically elasmobranchs, and then the
Oh, I'm
chimeras are
loving this.
holocephali. It's a whole evolutionary
Yeah.
like bit. They're just it's that whole entire thing of like all sharks, skates, rays, and chimeras are fish, but not all fish are sharks, skates, rays, and chimeras. There's just little tiny details here and there, and one of the biggest ones is they don't have bones. Like their skeletons aren't made out of bones. They're made out of cartilage. So the stuff at the tip of your nose or at the backs of your ears, that's what their skeletons are made out of. So that's probably one of the biggest difference between this group of animals and the rest of what we call the bony fish or teleost fish.
Oh my gosh, you're blowing my mind, Melissa. This is exactly what I wanted. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm gonna be at a dinner party and be like, y'all. No.
Let me tell you about the difference of fish and sharks.
No, but this is it is super helpful context for me. Especially like, I'll most definitely go back to read that article with that context. But looking at 1/3 of the world's what is it?
Chondrichthyans.
One more
it's
time.
hard. It's hard. It's hard. There you go.
That is just such a devastating blow to their population. Can you share a little bit, what are some of the factors that are threatening? Let's kind of focus on sharks mostly. What are some of the factors that are threatening shark populations?
Yeah. So probably the biggest ones that sharks face is unregulated, unsustainable pressure from overfishing and bycatch. So overfishing, for those who don't know, it's capturing more fish from an area than that stock can actually replenish itself. And for sharks, what that means is that sharks take a really long time to sexually mature in order to have babies. And then usually they don't have that many babies. They're not like fish where they just throw sperm and eggs up in the water column and are like, all right, be free. Hopefully I have a few 100,000 babies be born out of this. No, they take quite a long time to grow babies either in, we call them pups. So they're either in eggs or they're actually in the mother shark's stomach. And even though there's not any parental care for sharks, it takes a while for sharks to be pregnant, to give birth or lay an egg, and then that baby shark to grow up and be born. And oftentimes they don't grow up to adulthood. And so we're taking out more sharks than they can put back out into the ocean, essentially. Both in targeted fisheries, so fisheries that are specifically targeting sharks as something that they want to catch, and also bycatch, which means they're accidentally being caught, even though they weren't the specified target of a specific fishery. So those are the biggest ones, is overfishing and bycatch. But then, of course, you've got climate change and habitat destruction are another really big one, because we're demolishing where these animals call home. So not only do they not have those structures that they can rely on, but there goes their prey. And when you take out their prey, there goes their food source. And it's just a trickle-down effect, essentially. And while a lot of people, for them, an ocean filled with sharks is very scary, for me and a bunch of other different scientists, an ocean without sharks is the scariest thing, because we need healthy shark populations in order to have a healthy ocean. And the ocean's kind of important because it takes up the majority of our planet.
Can you say a bit more on that? I like where you're going there. I mean, let's focus more on, why should this matter to people that shark populations are in danger? Why do sharks matter to the ocean, period?
Yeah. So for the ocean, it's a whole ecological thing. They keep food webs balanced. They're really good at putting nutrients into different places. They'll eat a fish from the open ocean. They'll come back to the reef. They'll poop on the coral reef, and essentially that's fertilizer. Their mere presence can actually change how animals behave, which in turn changes how that animal eats and can actually affect how a specific area looks. So ecologically, they're very, very important, but also culturally, they're very important to a lot of people. Hawaii is a really good example, but here in Australia as well, there's many communities who have strong cultural ties to sharks, and you take that away from them, you're taking away a really big part of their identity. And then, of course, economic wise, sharks bring in billions of dollars a year, both for those fisheries, but also for ecotourism worldwide. And so, really, um, you need those sharks, not just for the ocean, but for our own sake.
Thinking about how the everyday person who may, when you talk to them about sharks, immediately start thinking of Jaws or Deep Blue Sea. What are some of the common misconceptions of what sharks are, what sharks do?
Yeah, so probably the most common ones is that they're man-eating monsters, they're mindless killers. As soon as you get into the water, you've got a target on your back, and that's just not true. If you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, we're not on the menu for them. We technically don't belong in the water. We're land animals. So a lot of times when a shark does bite a person, it's what some scientists or many scientists call mistaken identity. So we look like an animal that they would normally eat, such as a seal or a sea turtle. And so I think we love to hate on our monsters. We love to hate on these animals that are so different from anything that we've kind of seen and kind of fuels our nightmares. And so that's what sells for Hollywood in a lot of movies. That's why you've got Jaws, you've got all of the Sharknadoes, you've got Deep Blue. I mean, the whole list goes on. Every summer, a blockbuster comes out that has something to do with a shark. The reality is so different. I really wish, and I know I have a lot of privilege being able to swim with sharks on quite a regular basis, but I really wish that we could make it a bit more accessible for people to swim with these animals in a controlled environment, an environment where people are actually doing the right thing, not trying to pet them, not trying to ride them, not trying to feed them dangerously or anything like that. I wish people could just kind of see them in the wild because it's so different from what's portrayed in the media. A lot of times, for example, sharks sometimes don't like noise. And so if you're in a scuba dive with breathing out, you've got bubbles and it's loud and it's noisy and they want nothing to do with you. They'll stay really, really far away and they're just like, nah, I'm not going near that noisy thing. Wow. Sometimes they're very curious. They want to come a bit closer. They like nudge you. That sometimes if you have a camera or sometimes you have a PVC pipe, you've got to like nudge them away being like, all right, like give me a little bit of space because they're so interested. It's just fascinating to me, the different personalities you see. And it's beautiful just kind of seeing this relatively heavy animal oftentimes just gliding effortlessly through the water, kind of checking you out. It's something I wish more people could see because I think if they knew how sharks actually were, and if they knew the variety of sharks, there's over 500 different species of sharks. Not all of them look like great whites or tiger sharks or bull sharks, which are the quote unquote scary ones. I have ones that fit in the palm of my hand. I think if people saw the diversity of sharks and saw them in their own natural environment, they'd think a little bit differently about them.
We weren't always, as a people, we weren't always afraid of sharks. Can you share a little bit about that, like humans and shark relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really cool having gone back and looked at all the different folklores and whatnot, where a lot of times sharks were seen as gods or deities that people revered. Oftentimes they were also seen as what literally shaped the land of a specific community. There's so many that I found where people really idolized sharks in a positive way. Sharks were seen as protectors, seen sometimes as ancestors, like the reincarnation of an ancestor. Other times they were tricksters. Other times they were the bad guys. And so, it just shows that even with indigenous communities, it is a complex relationship. But I think what indigenous communities have shown so well with both nature and any kind of animal really is that ability to coexist with those animals. Even if there was any kind of fear, they still respected them. They still gave that animal its space. They had that coexisting mindset, which I think we've almost forgotten about nowadays. We've kind of let our mindset of being like, oh, we live on this planet, it's all ours, gloss over the fact that these animals have been around for millions of years, way longer than we've ever been around. And, it's their bit first. And so, yeah, I think to me, it was just fascinating to see that there is still such complexity with the relationship of these animals. It just looks a little bit different and is a bit skewed towards the negatives nowadays.
Looking looking back at yourself as a kid, you have a series of books that are essentially about nature, right? I mean, that's very simple. I'm simplifying it, but the series is called Wild Survival. What should people know about that series? What do you hope kids get from that? What do you hope their parents gain from reading them? Give us that elevator pitch.
Yeah, so Wild Survival is about an Afro-Latinx family who had a wildly popular YouTube channel, which was known as Wild Survival, where the family who owns a zoo and sanctuary, like wildlife sanctuary, they would show behind the scenes of them rescuing animals, of the veterinarian processes and that sort of stuff. And they got picked up by a TV producer. And so this is kind of their first foray into the TV world and what's kind of going on. And the two kids, Faye and Adriana, Faye is the older brother of Adriana, they always were behind the cameras. So they weren't allowed to be in front of the cameras for the YouTube series. But for the TV series, now they get to be in front of the cameras. So it's kind of a coming of age story of Adriana specifically. She's the protagonist, the main heroine, if you will, is really trying to prove to her family, but also herself, that she can do this, that this is what she wants to do. And is showing her parents that she's old enough and mature enough to be in front of the camera and kind of host her own wildlife show. There's issues that come along, mostly because she still is a kid. And always, when kids get a little bit too overconfident, there are some problems that come up. But the thing that I really love is the family sticks by each other no matter what. They're always looking out for one another. They're always helping one another out. It is about that comunidad again. And so the first book is, because it is a series, the first book is based out of Cuba. The second one is based out of Sri Lanka. And the third one, which actually comes out April of this year, so 2022, is based out of Mexico. So it focuses on different predators who have these different misunderstood predators, essentially. So the first one's about crocodiles, the second one's about sharks, and the third one is about jaguars and a community trying to live with the jaguars that are around them. And so it always is about those tensions that people have with wildlife and how you can kind of overcome it to have that coexisting mindset instead. So because the Villalobos family is Afro-Latinx, there is Spanish in there. So you can learn Spanish, both with your child, but also as an adult. Because it is all about wildlife, you actually have field notebook notes of the different animals that both easy to digest for both kids and for adults. In the back of the book, there's usually a Q&A section. So for the first one, it's the differences between a crocodile and an alligator. A little bit about the story of what inspired that book. For the sharks, it's a Q&A of the most frequently asked shark questions. It's based out of Sri Lanka, so it not only focuses or showcases the Spanish language, it actually showcases the different languages that are in Sri Lanka as well. And the same exact thing with the third one as well. It's based out of Mexico. So again, it's mostly Spanish, but it talks a bit about the jaguars and the differences between jaguars and other big cats. Q&A with a jaguar scientist about what's going on in the book and also what actually exists out there in regards to wildlife research and the status of these animals as well. So I've had both small kids reading it and absolutely love it, and I've got my friends and family and their friends and family read it and they're like, oh, this is actually really good and I'm enjoying it. So yeah, I think for me, again, it's that whole representation thing. How many Afro-Latinxes do you see in the wildlife conservation sphere? Very few. And so it's telling that story of the different family dynamics of the possibilities that are out there. And so I'm hoping that those who read it, both young and old, can see themselves a little bit in each of the different characters. And at the end of it, not only come away from learning something, and who knows, maybe wanting to learn a little bit more about the topics that they've gone over, but also with a sense of, hey, if she can do it, I can do it as well. And it's also a lot of fun because it actually shows you wilderness survival skills. So, for example, how to tell the time based on the sun and the direction based on the sun, how to make a sling for your arm if you don't have a traditional sling, based out of just like your t-shirt and that sort of stuff, essentially. So it's an educational, fun book. I'm hoping to write more of the series. We'll see if it's a smashing hit. The first two were good hits, so I'm very excited about that. Nice. But yeah, it's just my way of putting more books out there that I wish I had as a kid and putting out more of that representation.
Hola, Joshua Smyser-DeLeon here, founder and host of the Paseo podcast. Thanks for listening to the show, where we highlight stories by, from, and about the Puerto Rican community, from La Isla to the diaspora. If you want to help us share the diverse and vibrant stories that make up the Puerto Rican communities here on Paseo Boricua in Chicago and around the world, subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you stream your podcasts. Subscribing helps more people find the show and will help you make sure you never miss an episode. Leaving a 5-star rating and showing some love in the comments helps too. You can also give a donation by looking up the Paseo podcast on savechicagomedia.org. Okay, that's enough from me. Enjoy the show. This past Olympics, Summer Olympics, Jasmine Camacho Quinn brought Puerto Rico our second ever gold medal. And there was a ton of people, right? A ton of people like super excited, happy that she won. But I felt like, and I don't know if you saw this on Twitter too, on Puerto Rican Twitter, but I felt like you had a lot of Boricuas questioning her Boricua card. Like, is she Puerto Rican? Because she didn't speak Spanish fluently. She wasn't born on the island. Of course, we can't ignore that she herself was Afro-Boricua. So the way that powers that be try to whitewash what representation looks like of our people, like, I think there's a little bit of racism in there as to where that was coming from and people questioning whether or not she was Puerto Rican. So that's just inspired this question, because I don't think there is a checklist of what it means to be Puerto Rican, but I always love hearing what guests have to say and what their experiences have been and how they look at that question. So anyway, I just wanted to preface it with that. But yeah, what does being Puerto Rican and what does being Mexican mean to you?
Yeah, I think first off, I think that's a really good point, is that within our community, we can be so vile to one another of being like, oh, you're not Latina enough, you're not Latino enough, you're not Latinx enough. And it's one of those things that we need to stop that. Mm-hmm. Like, we really need to stop the division between our community, because there isn't one way to be Latinx. There's many different ways of being Latinx, and that includes having broken Spanish or no Spanish or perfect Spanish. My Spanish by no means is any perfect, because I left Mexico when we were quite young, and in order to kind of better assimilate into the United States, we actually didn't speak Spanish at home until my mom was like, oh, wait a minute, they're losing their Spanish. And by that point, it was kind of a bit too late. And so I really put the onus on me to relearn it again. But how many Mexicans do you think, or Puerto Ricans, both of them, do you think are in Australia? Like, none. We just got Taco Bell here for the first time, and all my Aussie friends were like, oh, you must be so excited to have Mexican here. And I'm like, no, please no. And I've told people I'm from Puerto Rico before, and they're like, oh, is that in Europe? And I'm like, Dios, dame paciencia, por favor. Chacho. No. And so it's one of those things that we have to stop defining Latinidad in one way, because it doesn't exist in one single way. It comes in a multitude of colors, a multitude of shades. So we need to stop. For me, being Puerto Rican and Mexican, it is so deeply ingrained in who I am. It's everything to me. And, I think my background, my heritage, my culture has really paved the way for me to be where I am. I do everything with a bit of flair, with a bit of stubbornness, of that Latin heat, always with mi comunidad en mi mente. And I think that sets me apart from other scientists and science communicators, because not only do I then get a really strong comunidad who's like, hey, she's one of us. I see what she's trying to do. I love interacting with her and whatnot. But also, I think a lot of times for science, we get frowned upon if we get excited about something. Like if we outwardly show excitement and stuff like that. And I've been told by that before, by other scientists who are like, ooh, you're just a little bit too excited about this. And I'm like, since when is that a bad thing?
Right.
And I don't know if it's just a me thing or if it's part of my culture and whatnot, but I'm proud to always be happy and look at life through childlike eyes. And what I mean by that is always finding something cool. Even in the small little things, I always find something that's awesome about what's around me. And yeah, I'm not ashamed of that. That makes me who I am. I think that sets me apart. And I think I have a lot of my culture to thank for that. And so, yeah, it means everything to me.
Well said. I mean, shame on those people that were poo-pooing your excitement. What the hell? Who does that? You're too happy? What?
Especially when we're doing stuff that's like really cool and has never been done before. And I'm like, how are you not excited about this? They're just sitting there all mute. Like, and I'm like, no, I don't want to grow up to be like that.
No, that's wild. I mean, and how many people can say they genuinely get excited about their job? Yeah. Not many of us. So you're breathing rare air, and what a blessing that is. I mean, like, hell yeah. I mean, if I saw somebody that was excited at work, I'd be like, I feel like that would make me kind of that much more excited. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's it.
Some people are weird.
Honestly, you've got this entire amazing world out there and you're not pumped up about it. Like, what?
Well, I love the positive energy. What would you say has been one of the best pieces of advice that you've ever been given?
Yeah. For me, probably the best piece of advice I've been given is keep going. Even when you're completely by yourself and it feels like nobody's on your side, if you believe in what you're doing, keep going and you'll find that community, those support people around you. And I think that's really important in not just the science and science communicator sphere, but in all of life, is finding a really good group of people who can support you, who you can support and help lift up as well. And they can help you keep going on the days that you're just like, nah, everything I'm doing is useless and worthless, da-da-da. They'll sit you down and be like, excuse me, you are amazing. Do I have to remind you why? I think, yeah, just that little voice saying, keep going. Because if you're passionate about what you're doing, if you really believe in what you're doing, go out there and show the world what they're missing.
Right on. Well, for people that don't want to miss out on your work, what you do, whether that's writing, whether that's researching, if people want to keep up with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so I'm all over social media. On Twitter, I am MCMSharksXX. On Instagram and Facebook, I am Melissa Cristina Márquez. So those are probably my big three. On YouTube, I've also got Melissa Cristina Márquez. It doesn't have any videos yet, but that is coming. So yeah, that's the best way to find me. And if people have questions about sharks, about being a Latina in marine biology or a Latina in STEM, feel free to reach out to me. I'm like any other millennial, I've got my phone near me all the time. So I'm happy to chat.
All right. Melissa Cristina Márquez, marine biologist, science communicator, and author. Thank you so much for being on the Paseo podcast.
Gracias, Joshua.